So I love this game that they did because it illustrates how focused and instrumental a person can become, such that then they will ignore the detail that would have allowed them to skip over a lot of the behaviors they were willing to engage in, right? So, sometimes being blinded by, in this case, competitiveness, I want to, I want to win. So I'm going to just go through these steps as fast as I can and not notice that had I just read the entire list, I wouldn't have had to have done any of these things. So on average, a person will display this kind of instrumentality where they're going to get stuff done in certain situations, right? Like under the competitiveness, that's going to pull out that that blind instrumentality where you're not really even thinking about whether this is the right behavior or not. You just go ahead and just start doing. Don't ask any questions. Oh my gosh, I just flashed to something that my husband frequently says, which is don't ask any questions, just start doing it. I mean, like literally he tells me, don't ask me any questions, get in the boat and row, basically. And I'm like, but I have some questions I would like answered before I get in the boat and row. But that's very characteristic of an instrumental viewpoint where you're like, just do the behaviors and then everything will come out fine. Okay. So we're going to wrap up this chapter by talking a little bit about what we know based on cross-cultural studies. So Mead, and this is Margaret Mead, so this is some classic anthropological work, Mead and Oakley. And then we've got Whiting and Edwards, which is a little tiny bit more recent, like maybe a decade more recent. Mead and Oakley recognized cross-cultural gender differences. Every culture that they entered had divisions of labor, had differences in expressions, the things that males were encouraged or allowed to do versus things that the females were encouraged or allowed to do. Every culture that they observed had this kind of, they may not be exactly the same gender differences, but every culture that they entered had, especially divisions of labor, and then different kinds of traits or skill sets being expressed by the two sexes. Whiting and Edwards, on the other hand, said, okay, let's take it a step back and let's not look at things for one thing for division of labor. A lot of times when we are making observations of other people and we step into their world, like an anthropologist does, where they go in and they live with the culture for some amount of time, we focus most heavily on the sort of reproductive years, like the mid-adulthood time, from full reproductive capability until old age. Like we want to see the ones who are the most active, who we think are sort of expressing what this culture is about, right? And so we might be getting an incorrect picture, according to Whiting and Edwards, about which behaviors are sort of, this is what males and females do their whole lives, versus this is what males and females do during the reproductive years. And like Jung pointed out, and like the evolutionary psychology theories point out, it's possible that the stuff we do during our reproductive years are different from the things that we do before that and after that. And so taking it through that lens, and then also saying to themselves, okay, let's make sure that we don't define, let's say, instrumentality as the exact stuff that men do, and not notice that females do things that are instrumental also. Like, let's try and have a broad enough definition that if either sex displays this behavior, we'll notice it and we'll record it accurately. And through using those two, kind of tweaks from what Mead and Oakley did, Whiting and Edwards got the impression that there are consistencies in how males and females behave all across different cultures, that there are certain things that on average females do more often and on average males do across all the cultures that they observed. But then there's also a lot of overlap between the sexes, that, it's not the case that if there's not a man around here, I guess nobody's chopping wood. Like they didn't have, that's not what happened. They noticed that there was a lot of overlap in assertiveness and aggressiveness. Like I pointed out with animals, yeah, the male may be more dominant until the female has offspring. And all of a sudden she gets very dominant. She gets very aggressive. And so Whiting and Edwards pointed that out for humans too, that, you got to take the situation into account. You've got to take the sort of triggers into account, like what's going on that might elicit certain kinds of behaviors. Maybe this is maybe in a certain way an argument about traits. Like, are we saying that males and females have different traits and they are like this and this is how they are? Or are we making the argument that, maybe people are a little bit more flexible? Maybe we don't have rigid traits, and within the spectrum of don't have rigid traits, we don't have rigid traits that are demanded by the sex, right? So when we look at cross-cultural research, a lot of the explanation is going to be based on the way that they paid attention to the culture that they were observing and the ways that they defined the things that they were observing and so on. And we can get kind of different impressions from different researchers as a result of that. Cross-cultural research is tricky because you go into the other culture being a person from the culture you came from. And so the things that you're observing are always going to be filtered through the lens, your gender schema, right? Sorry, I'm a cognitive psychologist. It's going to be filtered through your gender schema. And so as you're watching the behavior of people in another culture, you're still going to be interpreting it through what you know and what you believe to be true. And it's really hard to be like truly objective and actually just see behavior for what it is without immediately trying to impose meaning on it. So I'm still not completely comfortable that we understand the role of gender and the role of sex on traits, or the role of sex on personality characteristics across different cultures. Like I'm not exactly sure that cross-cultural research has helped us very well to explain whether sex differences are more innate or more due to situation, or really honestly are an interaction of the two things. But hopefully there's going to be more and more cross-cultural research going on, and we'll get a better picture, as time goes on. All right, I believe that, oh yeah, ooh, I thought I had one more. It's right here. See, unfortunately, this little video, I can show it in class, but I can't. I'm going to have to, it can't be in our playlist. I'm going to have to just put it in our weekly module so that you can watch it. It's called Fa'afine. I can't say it correctly all in one thing. Fa'afine. These are boys who are raised to be girls, and it's a whole subculture. And so I think you might find it interesting because it really takes the role of socialization into consideration to examine whether that can be powerful enough to maybe override biological instincts or whatever. So I'll put that link in the module so you can watch it there. All right, so that concludes our lecture, and I will see you in the next chapter. We're getting close to being done, people. We're almost done.